We're just going to wait another minute for people to join. Okay, we're going to get started, everyone. So we want to thank everyone for joining our event this evening for this discussion on climate change. If you have joined the event, we're going to make an assumption that you understand, drum roll please, climate change is real. And when you live on an island, it presents real challenges and real concerns. Obviously, sea level rise when you live on a barrier island is of concern. When you are concerned about the greater intensification and the greater frequency of storms, especially when you live on an island that juts out into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So New York State has been actually doing a lot on climate change protection and climate change legislation, but we need federal action to really address this issue and to really make a difference and change the future. I'm going to ask you, if you're not part of the panel, can you hit, can you close your video, stop videotaping? Thank you. So before we begin, I'm Adrienne Esposito. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. I'd like the esteemed panel to introduce themselves. We'll start with Melissa. Melissa, you're on mute.
Hey, I'm Melissa Perrott. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Climate Action. I'm also a climate reality leader and mentor. I started Students for Climate Action 4 years ago because as an environmental educator, I knew I had to do something about climate change. But I also knew that I needed a passionate group of people to lead that charge, to help me lead that charge. And nobody's more charged than the youth. So I'm so proud of this group of students. We're in about 20 high schools across the country, and also we have a new European group. Our mission is very simple. We have one goal, and that is strictly to meet with elected officials, to educate them and work with them on climate policies and transitioning to renewable energy. We work with town, county, state, and federal officials. And I'm proud to say these students have needle.
Okay, if folks could please hit mute. You should be automatically muted. I don't know why that happened. Okay, I'm sorry, Melissa.
No, that's okay. These students have moved the needle on climate change. So we're very proud to be in the state of New York, who is leading the efforts as the most progressive state in the country on climate action, and we're here to ensure and work hard that our federal government does the same thing. And I just want to close by saying we're here because one student said, Melissa, can we have a congressional climate change town hall? And here we are. So never underestimate the power of youth, and I want to thank everybody who's helped make this happen.
Thank you. Julie Tai.
Hi, my name is Julie Tai. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters and the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. Our mission at the NYLCV Education Fund is to educate, engage, and empower New Yorkers to be effective advocates for the environment. We equip voters with information about climate and sustainability issues, and we encourage them to hold candidates accountable to their promises. And actually at the League, we do that under a separate organization where we provide scorecards on elected officials to make sure that they are voting the way that they say they're going to vote. We're very glad to be co-hosting this forum to make sure that the environment is top of mind for candidates and voters, because we often find that in the regular debate during the course of a campaign, climate and the environment have not been top of mind. This is obviously changing. We saw that with the presidential and vice presidential debates in the last few weeks, and that's very exciting. But it's certainly a continuous reminder that our actions affect the environment and what happens when we don't advocate for it. which is what we work on at the League. You know, like Melissa, we are advocating a lot for renewable energy, whether that means breaking down barriers to siting clean energy projects and helping to pass legislation that streamline that process. We're supporting offshore wind projects like South Fork Wind that was just advanced last week and is in this congressional district. And we're fighting to reduce emissions, in particular from the transportation sector, which is the leading contributor to climate change, working to make polluters pay as we move to clean fuels and electricity for our transportation sector. But really what we need to do most is make sure that voters are getting out there and actually voting and knowing where the candidates stand on these issues. So thank you all for joining us, because by being here, you're helping to send a message to our elected officials and our candidates that New Yorkers care about a healthy environment, a livable climate, and are paying attention during this election. So thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Julie. Happy to have you. Harrison.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Harrison Bench, and I'm the Deputy Director of Students for Climate Action, the organization that Melissa just spoke about. I'm also a sophomore student at the University of South Carolina, and I'm so excited to be here tonight. I've been a youth environmental advocate with Students for Climate Action for the past 4 years, and I don't have any plans of stopping anytime soon. I joined Students for Climate Action because even as a high schooler, I recognize the threats that climate change pose to my coastal community of Sable. And even today, climate change is still the most important issue to me and to millions of other young adults around the United States. For too long, there has been an absence of federal leadership on climate action. It's time for that to change. Climate change is here and it's only going to worsen. Higher temperatures, more persistent droughts, more intense hurricanes, more frequent wildfires. The list goes on. Here on Long Island, we will continue to see our sea levels rise and we will continue to see our air quality worsen. It's time for Washington, D.C. to act on climate. The solutions are out there, the solutions are available. It's time for the federal government to put aside partisan obstruction and implement these actions. Climate change does not care who you vote for. It will impact all of us. With this issue and so many others, it's time that we put all Americans first, regardless of party affiliation, and confront climate change. I hope that tonight's event is, at the very least, a baby step forward towards that end goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Gordian Reiki.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gordian Raki, and I'm Executive Director of Renewable Energy Long Island. Our mission is to simply accelerate the transition to 100% renewable energy. We've been doing this for a while. I also do work with the Climate Reality Project, just like Melissa and Harrison and many others. I'm also working with the town of East Hampton, which has set, back in 2014, set a 100% community-wide renewable energy goal, generating all of our electricity and later the equivalent of the energy in the other sectors from renewable energy. The way I look at where we are today is that we've now gotten ourselves in a real difficult situation. We've waited far too long to take action on climate change. Scientists have warned us for decades about the fact that we need to act. We now are facing a climate crisis. And what that means is that we now have very little time left to bring about the changes that we have to make to our economy that we could have made much more easily and comfortably if we started back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But now we got to do that very rapidly. We have to come down to essentially zero carbon within just a couple of decades. That means we have to act at scale, a tremendous scale, and we have to act with great urgency. We really got to speed things up. What we do have to avoid is to reach these dangerous tipping points. You've heard about the fact that we need to stay below, well below 2 degrees Celsius. We have to do that because otherwise climate will be facing catastrophic and irreversible effects of climate change. Basically, the way I look at it is that nature has set us a deadline and we got to deliver. And you can't argue with nature. Ignoring that deadline is simply not an option. So the good news is we've got everything we need. We've got all the technologies and the know-how and the money and everything we need except maybe the political will. And that's something we have to work on, and I think that's something we're going to talk about tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Christina.
Good evening. My name is Christine Gerkanu. I'm a 17-year-old student from Sachem East High School, and I'm also proud to be part of the Sachem East chapter of Students for Climate Action. A little bit about me. As I've been growing up, I've realized that I'm quite passionate about various topics and issues, including climate change. And with this specific topic, I have felt a mix of emotions, such as sadness, anger, confusion, as well as hopelessness. And I felt all of these since, as a kid, I thought I couldn't really do much about it. I'm not a person that has an influential, I'm not in an influential position or a powerful position, for example, to enact bills or laws. And I thought also due to my age, I wouldn't be taken too seriously. I was also deeply saddened and upset to see that the government was just not doing enough. Politicians didn't seem as upset and frightened about how our future could possibly look if we don't take actions that involve the implementation of clean resources and clean energy. And with all of these emotions and thoughts, I wasn't really sure how I could apply them. And that was until I found out about Students for Climate Action. And I couldn't believe that through this organization, it provided such a huge opportunity for me, as well as various other high school students, the option to actually be part of this conversation and to help lead the fight for climate action. And through this organization, it has helped us also educate ourselves and our community along the way. And I've been deeply inspired by various other youth activists, including Greta, who has been globally recognized as a youth leader for climate action. And as a Long Island native, I have seen and felt the impacts of climate change with the increase in temperatures, sea levels rising, as well as the detrimental effects from natural disasters, including hurricanes, and even the increase in effects of climate change due to anthropogenic emissions. And I realized from all of this and being part of Students for Climate Action that Long Island is in dire need of the implementation of clean energy. And as a member of Students for Climate Action, I really hope that our elected officials can lead Long Island onto the right path so we can maintain and ensure that Long Island can still be our place called home.
Thank you very much, Christine. That's great. Okay, so let's do a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We need for everyone here to know this is a nonpartisan event. All of our organizations are nonpartisan organizations. Our goal here is to educate all of you when you go to that voting booth, and you will go to that voting booth and cast your vote. You do so knowing a little bit better and knowing a little bit more substantially how the elected officials or how the candidates running for office view climate change. We want you to know that each candidate was asked the same 5 questions. These are videotapes that we're going to be showing you. They were provided the same 5 questions in advance. Sometimes it's hard to believe based on some of the answers, but they did get the questions in advance. And each person was allotted the same amount of time. So this was really done in a very fair way, a very equal way, and it is really designed for you to make, a good decision about who has the best knowledge, whose answers did you like the best, because as Gordian said earlier, and Julie, we need federal leadership. We have to win the war on climate change. And to do that, we must transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And that takes leadership, it takes political will, and most of all, it takes public support. And we're very grateful right now. We just hit 200 people are on this webinar and on this site. So thank you so much. It shows that we, the public, are interested in fighting climate change. We are all interested in making sure we protect the earth and leave it better for our children than the disaster we've created. And we really appreciate that. And thank you for joining us. We're going to get started. The first 2 interviews will be from the 1st Congressional District. The first one will be from Congressman Lee Zeldin. And the second interview that you're going to see will be from the Democratic candidate, Dr. Nancy Goroff. Okay, we're going to run the tapes. There's no volume, Julie. Zeldin for joining us for our climate change discussion. We're going to get right to the first question here. The first question is that your district's proximity to the ocean is both an economic driver to the local economy and also a big reason why lots of folks live here. However, that proximity is also a vulnerability to us, and I can say us since I live in the district, to the impacts of sea level rise and also the greater frequency of storms and the greater intensification of storms. There are many proposals in Congress to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Can you please identify specifically proposals that you're going to support to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And also, what do you think the role is of the federal government in helping us fight climate change?
I think it's really important for the government to be working with the private sector, to have a strong, robust partnership, to be able to make progress on this front. The Carbon Capture Improvement Act is a piece of legislation I co-sponsor, bipartisan bill that would have financial services, financial incentives for industrial facilities, power plants seeking to invest in carbon capture and storage equipment. I also think it's important when you look at high risk, high reward pursuits of technology that where a company might not have the ability to invest in research, that the federal government comes in and plays a very important role in that process. Here in the 1st Congressional District, we have Brookhaven National Lab, we have Stony Brook University, we have the ARPA-E projects that the research that gets pursued for the most part at Brookhaven National Lab, to a lesser extent at Stony Brook University, because the progress that we can find in the years and the decades that are ahead might be too much of a high risk, high reward endeavor for a particular company. So you can't just assume that that company is going to pursue this research by themselves. The federal government needs to be involved. This is a district almost completely surrounded by water, the 1st Congressional District, and every Long Islander, especially those in the East End, everyone is pro-conservation, pro-environment. We want access to clean air, clean water, and whether it's tripling funding for the Long Island Sound program or the Peconic Estuary, fully funding the National Estuary Program and Sea Grant. As you go around the 1st Congressional District, you see so many opportunities for investment to protect us. You mentioned in your question rising sea levels. Right now, we are finally with a signed chief's report on the Fire Island to Montauk Point plan, which was passed as part of the WRDA bill at the end of July. This 83 miles of coastline between Fire Island and Montauk Point will have a over $1 billion investment in coastal resiliency and to recover from Superstorm Sandy, not just to where we were, but stronger than ever before. These projects were included Hashimamic Cove and Southold, as well as studies of Real Point Preserve in Shelter Island and Goldsmiths Inlet in Southold, Wading River Creek in Riverhead. All of these projects are important for many different reasons, including what really makes the framework of a great question. So thank you.
Very good, thank you. My name is Melissa Parad. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Climate Action, and thank you for joining us. Second question. New York has ambitious goals to power 6 million homes with 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. The federal government plays a key role in advancing offshore wind projects. The Federal Bureau of Energy Management was supposed to release a map depicting new wind area by 2019. This map has still not been released. As a congressional member, how will you help advance the development of offshore wind?
Over the course of my time in office, I have frequently met with the companies that are involved in offshore wind, as well as others who are concerned about these projects from different perspectives. Some are the greatest champions of making sure that these offshore wind projects become a reality. Others have concerns, they have voices, and they want to make sure that those voices are heard and their concerns are addressed. It could be concern from the fishermen, or maybe you live where the the energy might be getting landed onto Long Island, it's important for everyone to have a voice and a seat at the table. For the process to be completed at this particular stage, you now are at the point where you're talking about, okay, if we're landing it at Smith Point Park, here's the map of where it's going to go, potentially up William Floyd, and this is the left-hand turn, this is the right-hand turn. And for the local elected officials, whether you're a member of Congress or you're a county legislator or a town councilman, it's extremely important for residents to feel like they have a voice. They also need education on how this is going to benefit them. We have some of the highest and most inefficient sources of energy here on Long Island right now. And as we look to pursue new opportunities, earlier on I mentioned the ARPA-E research that gets done primarily at Brookhaven National Lab, where you're doing the clean and green research and looking for alternative forms of energy, and wind is an opportunity for us. But for the average Long Islander, they may not be as aware as you are on how this can positively impact their lives. One of the most important ways that they want to know how it's going to impact their lives is going to be with their bill. They want to see cost savings each month. So I have found myself, my role as the member of Congress is communicating with the companies that are pursuing the projects, communicating with BOEM, communicating with anyone who comes to my office and they say, I have a voice, I'm not being heard, I need you to hear me, and sitting down with them and then putting people together. So what I have found is that miscommunication has been, over the course of years, the biggest source of friction. It's just that two parties aren't speaking to each other. And NIMBYism is a big thing here on Long Island, where you have people who are all in favor of having a particular line getting landed at the next town over, but they don't want it landed at their particular town. And decisions have to get made. And it's important when making the decisions that you have all of the facts. That's been my goal throughout this whole process is pursuing facts. I would encourage BOEM through this entire process, pursue facts, and to have an open dialogue, not just with the people who strongly support your initiative, but my message to the offshore wind companies is to also have a robust conversation with people who need an education on how this is going to impact their community and how it's going to impact their lives.
So the third question is the solar investment tax credit. Has really been a big success story in America in promoting the development of solar. Since it was enacted in 2006, solar power has grown 10,000%, creating literally thousands of high-paying jobs and also keeping energy dollars here at home in America. Unfortunately, though, that solar tax credit is set to expire next year in 2021. And that could create a devastating blow to the advancement of solar power across our country and Long Island. So the question is, Congressman, what will you do to ensure that that tax credit stays? And also, what else do you think you can do to help advance the implementation of solar power on Long Island and in our country?
We had these two different tax credits, PTC and an ITC. One is a production tax credit, the other is an investment tax credit. Both were extended as part of the Pfas Act, which President Obama signed into law. And that was during my first term in Congress. I co-sponsor legislation to extend the ITC for another 5 years. This is something that has strong bipartisan support. We can use more support in the House and the Senate. This is something that I believe is more likely as constituents and advocacy groups speak to their members of Congress, speak to their senators to educate on these tax credits and the positive effects for our environment, for our economy, for this investment to be made, educating on what the return is on the investment. So similarly to how I supported the extension of the ITC and the PTC in the past, that's why I'm co-sponsoring this legislation that exists right now in the House. And I would encourage my colleagues, whether it gets done before the end of this year or this is an item on the agenda in the House and the Senate in 2021, it's something that benefits Long Islanders, it would benefit the Long Island economy, and it would benefit our environment.
Thank you.
Great. So New York has the most aggressive plan to cut greenhouse gases in the country, but we need federal leadership to move this forward. Hydrofracking, expanding offshore drilling in the Arctic, and reversing regulations on coal moves the nation backwards. How will you fight back against fossil fuels?
Earlier on, I was speaking a little bit about the Carbon Capture Improvement Act, this legislation that I co-sponsored in the last Congress. It now exists with bipartisan support in this Congress as well. And there are these power plants and industrial facilities that exist. They are emitting carbon, and they can use that incentive to make that investment. Maybe they are ready to implement carbon capture and storage equipment at their site, but they need that incentive, and the consequence for their business model, for that community where that business is, and really for our country, all benefit. I believe that's really important that we pursue more common ground, because you have conservatives, moderates, and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, and I oftentimes find people talking past each other and not to each other on this issue. I'm a member of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. Their model is that when they add a new Republican, they'll add a new Democrat. When they're adding a new Democrat, they're adding a new Republican with it. And that parity, I think, is very helpful. The conversation is important. When I recall last Congress, there was an amendment on an appropriations bill, the Perry Amendment, that came up for a vote, and the Bipartisan Climate Solution Caucus members banded together, and we were able to form enough of a block to prevent this amendment from being passed. It was an amendment that would have had negative effects on studying climate change in the federal government. And it was not passed, not because a one party banded together and got it done alone, but it was because members of both parties banded together to get the job done. You mentioned offshore drilling. I remember when it was first put on the table, the possibility that they would pursue offshore drilling near Long Island or on the Atlantic. And they were meeting in state capitals. They were having hearings all throughout the eastern seaboard. And Albany is not on the coast, but we are. It's going to impact us much more so than the people who live up in Albany. So I picked up the phone. I contacted the Secretary of the Interior at that time, and I said, this isn't going to work. And fortunately, they made a very rare exception of holding a hearing in the 1st Congressional District to receive testimony from the local community. And it was a product of elected officials, community leaders, advocacy groups, concerned residents, all working together. And we certainly made our voice heard. And the reality is, when you look at the 1st Congressional District and the areas off our coast, we don't really have the resources that they are looking for as it relates to offshore drilling. It's not like some of these other areas they're targeting, so they'll cause a lot of environmental damage just unsuccessfully looking for something that's not even there. The infrastructure doesn't really exist, and on top of that, we don't want it. So I think that our voices were heard loud and clear. And that's something that really, you've seen partnerships formed with members of the House on both sides of the aisle from other states, where we may be thinking about Long Island more than Florida, and the folks in Florida might be thinking of Florida more than they're thinking about New York. But by us talking to each other, working with each other, and advocacy groups talking to each other and working with each other, we all become stronger in getting the message out. Because simply the blasting, the search for these resources off our coast can cause a significant amount of environmental damage, and even worse, you don't even find anything.
And I remember that public hearing. 300 people showed up in the middle of a nor'easter. You remember, it was quite the day. All right, Congressman, our last question, but not the least important. It's a question on clean water, something near and dear to most people's hearts. As climate change worsens, unfortunately, Long Island will feel more of the impact, such as drought, more frequent droughts, and also such as saltwater intrusion into our sole source aquifer. Clean drinking water is one of the most important public health challenges that face us today. And In this district, there are a number of clean water challenges, from toxic chemicals in our aquifer, having to change and replace lead pipe, and also remediation of existing contaminants. Can you tell us specifically what you would do to protect the source of our drinking water, but also to clean up the contamination that unfortunately is already there?
This question does take a lot of time and energy on the part of my team in my office, because we have had challenges here that go back decades, and we will always be asking ourselves, what more can we do to protect water quality here in a district like ours? Whether it's Gabreski and the water quality challenges that they had as we were coming into office, and the old Grumman site and the Navy doing their testing, as well as the area around Brookhaven National Lab. All throughout the 1st Congressional District, you have areas where individual hamlets, individual communities either want to know the results of the testing that is going on, or they want to get added. They want their water quality to be tested as well. I'm a member of the PFAS task force. I also co-sponsor a legislation, the Pfas Action Act, where it's important to not only be regulating the PFAS, but also the federal government needs to assist local communities in the remediation of it. This starts from the smallest scale of, if you see an issue, making sure that you're providing bottled water, to the larger challenge, which is the total size of the cost of the cleanup. Now, it turns out that for us here in the 1st Congressional District, the total cost is manageable. The problem is that all throughout the entire country are these massive military installations, and the Department of Defense is looking at the cost. This isn't something that the federal government has decided, okay, we're just going to snap our fingers, we're going to pass one bill, and then all of a sudden everything's going to be cleaned up from all across the entire country. But you have to make progress each year. That's very important. It's also would be helpful for the EPA to set a level maximum amount of contaminants in our local water supply. These are all issues that I've had an opportunity to fight with many of you together, as we're in the trenches calling on different levels of government to take certain action. This is one of those areas where I believe it was around the beginning of 2019 where there was a call made here on Long Island. It was certainly a call that was renewed to the EPA to be setting this new standard. There was a new report that had come out around that time comparing Long Island's water supply with the rest of the state. I would also say the septic system that the county, the grant program that was initiated, the IRS, because of the way it was set up, determined it to be taxable income. I co-sponsor legislation with Congressman Swazi that would correct that. That's important. Also, investing in our sewer infrastructure is key. I live on the Mastic Peninsula, the Shirley Mastic Beach community, the Forge River project. Forge River, which is one of the most contaminated, you could say the most contaminated river in the state. I guess depends who you ask on what day, but many studies have been done on that front. And I think one of the ways to improve our water supply is investing in our septic systems, in sewer infrastructure. That when you look at an area like the Mastic Peninsula, is a perfect example between the Forge River and the Karnes River. That investment, implementing the Forge River project to completion, is something that absolutely must happen. And it's not just because I live there in that community. It's something that when you see the investment into the hundreds of millions of dollars that's there right now to complete it, a vote of the local community saying, yes, we want it. Now's the time to get over the finish line and get that project done. So there's really a lot that goes into the answer, but PFAS, the septic system, the grant program from the county, as well as the federal investment that has been made and pursuing additional funds for more projects in the future, that's all important.
So Congressman, would you like to just take the last 2 minutes to say some closing remarks for our viewers?
In the 1st Congressional District, which is this amazing district on the east end of Long Island, as I said earlier, completely surrounded by water, we all want to see our environment protected. We want our coastlines to be secure. This is our home. When someone is saying from some other part of the country that we chose to live this close to the water and that we all should just move inland and get away from here, no, we want to stay here and fight for our home. And whether it's policy on flood mitigation to be able to afford your premiums, or it's Army Corps of Engineer projects to come in for coastal resiliency, or it's a dredging project, or it's repairing a dune, whatever it is that local governmental official or community group is asking for, we want to see that return on our investment. Going into the COVID-19 pandemic, the Army Corps of Engineers in the entire New York district, which includes several counties of New Jersey, we got to the point where 2/3 of the money that they had on hand was just for 1st Congressional District of New York projects. And it's really a result of everybody working together, fully funding the National Estuary Program, continuing to increase funding for the Long Island Sound Program, fully funding Sea Grant, protecting Plum Island. Right now, we're fortunately at a point the Senate finally passed legislation for this past fiscal year. We got into law to stop the sale. Now for FY 2021, let's stop the sale of Plum Island. We got $1.5 million for the lighthouse there, which is great. It's just a product of everybody working well together to protect our air, to protect our water. And there are opportunities for us to debate on policy. I would say, and right now there's an election coming up, the most important thing I could say for the environment is that when the election's over, that we all, every single person who's tuning in right now, once you're past an election, you all just work together to try to find common ground however possible to move our local environment forward, our national environment, our economy, our country. I've been ranked by the Georgetown University and the Lugar Center as the 12th most bipartisan member of the House of Representatives, because it's important if you want to actually get something done on the environment, if you want to get legislation over the finish line and appropriation over the finish line, if you have the attitude that you're going to go act on it alone and you're not going to work with anyone else who might disagree with you on other issues, well, then you might never have any victory to be able to report home about. So I think it's fantastic that you're hosting this. I appreciate your leadership in doing this, and for everyone for tuning in. It's important that everyone will vote. I'm sure if they are tuning in, they are going to vote. It's also important once the election is over, after everyone votes and the American people have their say, is that we work together on even more victories in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Nancy Goroff. We're happy to have you. We're going to jump right in with the first question. The district here's proximity to the ocean means that we are very vulnerable to climate change. The proximity to the ocean is an economic driver. It is also a reason why we live here and why we love it here. But that proximity to the ocean presents some unique challenges for us in the way of sea level rise, and also the greater frequency and intensification of hurricanes and storms. There are many national proposals to reduce carbon dioxide, the chief driver of climate change. If you win this seat, what will you do as a Congresswoman representing the 1st District to reduce carbon dioxide? And please be specific about the programs or the legislation that you would support to fight climate change.
Adrienne, thank you so much for that question. This is a top priority for me. I have been a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists for many years and serve on their National Advisory Board. And this was a major motivation for me in getting into this race. As you said, we live on an island, and in addition to sea level rise and extreme weather, coastal erosion is also a huge threat to us here and our way of life. To fight against climate change, we need to set ambitious targets. We should aim to be carbon neutral by 2035 in our energy production, and overall as soon after that as we can manage. And to get there, we need to deploy existing technologies in renewable energy, in clean vehicles, and in clean buildings. And that means building our clean energy infrastructure. We also need to invest in research to move us towards the technologies of the future. things that are scalable and that we can export to other countries like India or Bangladesh so that they can improve their quality of living without blowing the whole world's carbon budget. So when I get to Congress, I intend to be a leader on this issue. I want my office to be a resource for every member of Congress, Republican and Democratic, so that they can get access to the best information available, get all of their questions answered, and then I will hold their feet to the fire to make sure that we take meaningful action on climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Gore.
Thank you so much for being here. Very excited to meet you. So New York has some ambitious goals when it comes to renewable energy. One of them is to power 6 million homes with 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035, as you were mentioning before. The federal government plays a key role in getting that passed. We were supposed to have a map depicting wind sites, and that has not been released yet. So what would you do in Congress to get that through?
Thank you for that question, Melissa. As I said, this is all really important, and I think that we need to start taking action as soon as possible. We have an opportunity in the coming year because it's clear, because of the pandemic and the economic devastation that it has caused, that we're going to need to have real federal stimulus funding. And I want to make sure when I get to Congress that that stimulus includes money for infrastructure, and especially for clean energy infrastructure to help us build those offshore wind locations. And I will certainly be there as a voice for how important this is to get the maps out and get moving so that we can get those wind farms going as quickly as possible.
Well, the solar investment tax credit has been a real success story in the federal government. It was enacted in 2006, and since then, we're happy to say, solar power has increased by 10,000%, creating thousands of good-paying jobs, as well as investing literally billions into our local economy and keeping our energy dollars here. Unfortunately, that tax credit expires next year in 2021. Will you support the reenactment of that tax credit? And also, what would you do if serving in Congress to help continue to promote solar on Long Island and throughout the rest of our nation?
Thank you for that question, Adrienne. As I said, it's so important that we get renewable energy sources expanded across the country, including here on Long Island. And tax credits are certainly one mechanism that has been very successful and can continue to be successful. And so I think it's something we need to really seriously consider. How are we going to do that, and should we extend it? It's something I am at this point in favor of, but I need to get more complete information on that. We are going to have to do everything we can to get renewable energy deployed. Thankfully, solar is much more economical now than it was before, and we want to make sure that that continues to be true, because the cost to us and our communities of sticking with fossil fuels is too high. We cannot afford that. And so I will certainly be pushing to make sure we do whatever we need to get solar put in place. One thing which I know is an issue here locally in some parts of the district, which is not really a congressional issue, but it shows where a member of Congress can be helpful on the local level, is that there are some local ordinances that make it more difficult to have solar in some locations. And I think this is where the congressional leadership, as well as local, our town governments and our county government, should all be working together. And I see one of my roles as a representative as bringing people together to have those discussions so that we can make it easier for people to use solar energy here on Long Island.
Dr. Goroth, as you know, New York has the most ambitious goal in the country to reduce carbon emissions. But to ensure that that happens on a national level, we need real leadership in our federal government. Acts like hydrofracking, expanding offshore drilling in the Arctic, and reversing regulations just put us back. What do you plan on doing to fight against fossil fuels?
Thank you for that question, Melissa. And I am so proud of New York for the legislation that was passed last year with leadership from my own state assemblyman, Steve Engelbright, who is himself a scientist. I think it shows the benefit of having scientists taking leadership on these issues. And that is exactly the role that I intend to play at the national level. If I'm elected, I'll be the first female PhD scientist ever to serve in Congress and one of only 2 PhD scientists in the House. And so I think my leadership will be something I really take very seriously in helping make sure that every member of Congress understands the urgency of this threat and how important it is that we do take action, that we stop investment in fossil fuel infrastructure and broaden our investments in green energy, clean buildings, clean vehicles. That is absolutely a commitment I am very happy to make to you today.
Okay, and the last question, but not the least, a topic that's near and dear, I think, to everyone on Long Island's hearts, and that's the issue of clean water. As climate change continues to progress, greater threats will hit Long Island, such as drought, but also saltwater intrusion into our aquifer system. One of the greatest challenges is to protect our water and protect public health and safety. Long Island has many problems associated with our quality of water. We need to change out lead pipes. We need to fight against toxic chemicals in the groundwater and also remediate plumes that are already there. What would you do as a congressional representative to help attain and fight for clean water for Long Island and, of course, the nation?
Adrian, thank you so much for that question. This is a concern I hear about all the time from people in the district from across the political spectrum. People want to make sure that our water is safe. And of course, we now know that there are trace contaminants that are a real concern. The perfluoroalkyl compounds and 1,4-dioxane. These are things that we need to be very careful about monitoring so we know exactly where those plumes are and where exposure is a risk for people in their water supply. And we need the EPA not only to be monitoring, but also to be then helping with remediation, and where appropriate, the Defense Department should be helping with remediation also, because of course we have many defense contractors who have had manufacturing on Long Island, and that has been a big part of the contamination. This is something that is so important to Long Island families. With our sole source aquifer, people need to know that their water is safe.
Thank you. And now, please feel free to take 2 minutes and do a summary statement that you would like the people of the 1st Congressional District to hear.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has been listening to this discussion. I am so excited at the prospect of being your representative here in New York's 1st District. I got into this race because I was frustrated and infuriated at the way that our representative, Lee Zeldin, and our president have been ignoring the facts and ignoring the evidence on issue after issue, but especially on the issues of climate change and the environment. We need to re-enter the Paris Accord. We need to make sure that we are working actively and ambitiously to reduce our carbon output as quickly as possible down to 0. That's the only way we can sustain our way of life here on Long Island. And I'm excited to work on that for you, for the people of this district. And I will be thrilled to have your support in that effort. Thanks so much.
Okay, so you've heard now from the candidates from Congressional District 1. I wanted to remind folks, I'm monitoring all your questions in the Q&A section. The chat has been disabled because we have 200 people on here, so we thought that might be a little overwhelming. Most of you seem to have put questions, though, in for the candidates. I just want to gently remind you that they are videoed. They're not here, so I can't ask them the questions. So the questions are supposed to be for the panel. But I did see there's a good question about climate change and transportation. I thought perhaps that'd be a good question for Julie to, answer.
So what's the question? Is there a specific question?
Well, there is, yes, Julie, there is a specific question.
Because there's a lot going on in the transportation.
Yes. Well, why don't you talk generally about the relationship between transportation and climate change? Mostly we hear about buildings, but we don't always hear about transportation.
Okay. So transportation is actually the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions, both in our country and in our state in particular. In New York City, it's a little bit different because there's so much reliance on mass transit. And so buildings are in fact more there. But we've done a good job at starting to reduce emissions associated with the power generation with our electricity. The transportation sector really is the biggest source that's out there. So that means your cars, your trucks, trains, airplanes, off-road equipment is considered, think about construction equipment, that's considered transportation-related emissions. We're getting that because we're very reliant on fossil fuels. Diesel and gasoline are 95% of what we're using to power our transportation sector right now. And that is something, or at least our on-road transportation sector, and that's something that we can do a lot about. At the League, we're actually leading a coalition to establish a clean fuel standard in New York. They've done this in California. It requires dirty fuel providers, so fossil gasoline, fossil diesel, to buy credits from clean fuel producers like electricity and renewable natural gas, renewable biodiesel, which is made from organics like our sewage and our food waste. So there are opportunities to do that. The state is investing a lot in electric vehicle infrastructure to make sure that people know that if they buy an EV, that they have a lot of places that they can go and get their car charged. I would argue that most of the time during the week, you're probably driving to work. It's probably not that far. You're dropping your kids off at school. You're going to church. You're going to the grocery store. These are all short trips that you, generally speaking, don't need to have sort of what's called range anxiety for. But it is certainly something that people have. And in Long Island, where many people have driveways or garages, you can often charge at home. So there's a lot of work that we can do ourselves to buy cleaner vehicles with electric vehicles, to take mass transit more. Mass transit is much more efficient. So there's a lot of work we need to do, but there's a lot of opportunities, and these are things that will frankly save you money over time, because when you buy an electric vehicle, you're not buying gas. You're not buying oil. You don't have to change your oil every 3,000 miles because it doesn't have a combustion engine that requires that. There's a lot fewer moving parts. So there's a lot of opportunity for transportation, and it's really something that we need to tackle if we want to take on climate change.
Okay, we're just going to take one more, and then we're going to move on to District 2, because a lot of these questions here, as I said, are for the candidates. So I'm very sorry if I caused confusion with that. I just thought you realized it was a video, but there is one specifically for you, Julie. It's a little pointed and a little, specific, but I think it's fair to ask it. It's from a viewer named Mark. This question is for Julie at LCV. It says, according to the National LCV Congressional Scorecard, since being elected to Congress, Congressman Lee Zeldin has voted against measures that would mitigate climate change on 33 out of 36 bills in the House, or 92% of the time. What does that say about Zeldin's leadership on climate change?
Certainly, there are many considerations that we would take when we look at a candidate for determining whether or not we're going to endorse them. And one of them is votes that they take. Certainly, we expect candidates to have high scores to earn our endorsement. I mean, that's something that we talk about both with National, who does the scorecard, the National League of Conservation Voters, as well as New York, when we're making a decision about whether or not we're going to endorse a candidate. In New York, we require candidates to have a score of 80% or more to be considered eligible for an endorsement. And we would hope that our members of Congress, along with our members of the state legislature, would act on climate change by voting in favor of those items. So certainly that's why we put out scorecards, is to let voters know where where our candidates stand on issues when they are actually elected into office.
Okay, we're going to just move on to the next congressional district. This is very unusual because it is a rare thing, I think anywhere in the nation, but particularly on Long Island, to have an open seat for Congress. So we have two people running for the 2nd congressional district. As you all know, Congressman King is retiring after a very long stint at being our congressman. And we have 2 people who are running. We have Assemblyman Garbarino, who is the current assemblyman for the Patchogue area. And we also have a councilwoman from Babylon, Jackie
Gordon.
Gordon, thank you, who is running on the Democratic ticket. So we have both of their interviews. They're a little shorter than the last 2. So let's run those tapes and then we're going to come back and talk climate change. And also, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, but they have to be questions for the panel, not for Jackie and not for Andrew. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julie Tai. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. We're so happy you could be here today. And it's very fitting that we are very close to the ocean because your district, as you know, is very proximate to the ocean, which is both an economic driver for the community as well as a reason why many people want to live here. However, with climate change happening, being close to the ocean also makes the community more at risk for the impacts of climate change, in particular from rising sea levels and more frequent and severe hurricanes. There are many federal plans to address greenhouse gas emissions. What would you support from a federal plan for addressing greenhouse gas emissions? And what would you do to help reduce those greenhouse gas emissions?
Thank you for having me. You know, when I sit here and I look at this park and I think about those rising waters, what comes to mind is when I came home from my last deployment to Afghanistan in 2012. Just 2 weeks later, Superstorm Sandy hit, and this community was devastated. Right now, there are families who are still overcoming those tragedies. And so for folks in this district, we know that climate change is real. And we know that individuals have to play a part in addressing climate change, but the federal government has a part to play too. Okay, first things first, we have to re-enter into the Paris Climate Agreement because as a nation, we have a responsibility to address climate change and to join with our global partners to make sure that we do.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon, for being here. My name is Harrison Bench. I'm the Deputy Director of Students for Climate Action. New York State has ambitious plans to power 6 million homes with 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind energy by the year 2035. The federal government plays a key role in ensuring that offshore wind is expanded to be available to more Americans. The Federal Bureau of Land Management was supposed to release a map depicting new wind area by the year 2019, but that map has still not been released. As a congressional member, how will you help advance the development of offshore wind energy in the United States of America?
Harrison, it's my pleasure that you're here. I spent 32 years with young people, and I just love young people. So thank you so much for that question. As a member of Congress, my priority will be to, I will prioritize renewable energy sources. And I think in doing that, what we have to do is support companies that are innovative and that create these renewable sources. And we have to help them get their products all the way to market. In doing that, we also have to make sure that we secure the funding for them in case they need help with funding. And we also have to make sure that we help them with any environmental impact studies that they need. And we also hold them to the time frames as that you've mentioned. And so that we're continually moving forward and getting to our goal with climate change and the issues that it's causing.
The Solar Investment Tax Credit, or the ITC, is one of the most important federal policies to support the growth of solar. Since it was established in 2006, the solar industry has grown by more than 10,000%. It's creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and resulted in billions of dollars of investment in the United States alone. We are concerned that there has been a very successful program, but that right now it looks as though the tax credit will expire in 2021. Would you, as a member of Congress, support extension of the ITC for solar and other renewable energy? And what else would you do to help support the growth of solar, both in Long Island and in the United States for large?
As a member of Congress, I will hands down support the extension of the tax credit. I believe that that tax incentive was a primary force in growing the solar industry. We've seen it here on Long Island. I think it's good for jobs, it's good for the economy. Here on Long Island, we have many colleges and universities. I worked at a vocational high school for 32 years. So I know how the trade industries work and how it can bolster our economy. And so what I envision is high schools, community colleges, universities, tech schools, partnering with solar industry to continue to grow this. That tax incentive will help to fund that growth and to push that growth. And so I would be, that would be one of my priorities in Congress.
New York State has one of the most aggressive plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the country, but we need federal leadership to ensure that these reductions are met on a national level. Hydrofracking, expanding offshore drilling in the Arctic, and reversing regulations on coal moves the nation in the wrong direction. As a representative in Congress, what would you do to fight back against fossil fuels?
Best way to fight against fossil fuels is to make renewable energy competitive. And so in order to do that, what we have to do is support innovative and smart renewable energy sources. So those companies that are creating this, we have to support them. We have to give them the infrastructure to help their companies. We have to help them with the environmental impact study. As a councilwoman on the town board, I know how private companies and local governments depend on those federal impact studies. So we have to make sure they get to them in a timely manner. So all of these things that the federal government can do to help these companies, that's what we need to do. It will always be my priority. I have pledged not to take a dime from big corporations for my campaign. So the folks in the 2nd Congressional District will always be my priority. Ensuring that the waters do not come across this land anymore will always be my priority, not fossil fuel companies.
As climate change worsens, Long Island faces a threat of intrusion into our drinking water from salt, as well as threats from groundwater toxins, such as plumes that we've seen of historic manufacturing processes. Clean drinking water is one of the most important public health matters facing us here in Long Island and elsewhere, including replacing lead service lines, protecting the aquifer from groundwater contamination, and the saltwater intrusion that we mentioned. As a member of Congress, what would you do to protect clean drinking water and to remove threats from Long Island's sole source aquifer?
So I am very concerned about our drinking water on Long Island, and so are voters as I speak to them. And so that's a huge priority for me. The Bethpage plume is of critical concern, and I am just astounded as to the place it's in now. So as a member of Congress, that's one of my biggest priority because it is the source of drinking water for this region, right? And so I think what we need to do is get local, state, and federal environmental agencies together to figure out what went wrong. That should never happen again. That's number one. Number two, we need to find out who was harmed, who has been harmed by this, and we need to make them whole, right? Then what I would propose is to have a bill in Congress so that we can get that plume cleaned up. And I know we've been trying to do this, but my bill will institute critical legislation to make critical penalties for foot dragging. That plume grows a foot a day. So perhaps penalties should match how much that plume is growing, because lives are being damaged every single day. And I'd be willing to do that. It's shameful. And also, legislation that has a chain of custody. So although companies may split and you no longer, let's say, are tied to a company, but you never lose the tie to your responsibility if you are part of a pollution problem.
Before we end here today, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to provide any more statement that you'd like to make to your potential constituents.
Well, we are renters here. We are renters here, and we have a responsibility to leave the earth better than we found it. And in few generations past, we haven't done that. But as you know, my ancestors have said, when you know better, you do better. And so now we realize the harm that we've caused to this earth. And so now we need to do better so that when we leave it for our children and their grandchildren, it's in a much better place than it is now. And as leaders, we're responsible to make that happen.
Hi, my name is Julie Ty. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. I'm so glad you could be here today to talk to us about climate change in particular. Your district is so close to the ocean. It's something that really is a driver both of the economy and why so many people want to live here. However, being so close to the ocean also makes your community more at risk from the changes of climate. In particular with dealing with sea level rise and more severe and more frequent storms. There are many proposals to address greenhouse gas emissions at the federal level. What do you think is the role of the federal government in addressing greenhouse gas emissions? And what specific policies would you propose or support to address climate change?
Well, first off, Julie, thank you so much for coming. Harrison, thank you so much for coming today and interviewing me about this. I grew up on the South Shore, Long Island. The environment is very important to me. I learned to sail and swim in the Great South Bay. I was first elected when Superstorm Sandy happened. 2 weeks before the elections, Superstorm Sandy happened, and half of the district was underwater, and I couldn't go visit constituents. So it is climate change is very important. Protecting the South Shore of Long Island is very important. Like you said, it's big for the economy. It's also a big reason why people want to live here. People stay here, they come here during the summer from all over because it's one of the greatest places to live on earth. So as a member of the Assembly, I served on the Environmental Conservation Committee. I was always a big, strong proponent of protecting the Great South Bay and the ocean and even the Long Island Sound when there were bills dealing with that. As a member of Congress, I'm going to continue that fight. There are a lot of things, a lot of bills that have been proposed to combat carbon emissions. There is a carbon recapture tax credit, which is something I would definitely support. I know there's also a bill or a plan that was just proposed. It's called the Trillion Trees that the House Republicans came out with. I actually find it very interesting because for some reason, being pro-environment, I think over the years people turned it into a Democratic issue when it shouldn't be a Democrat or Republican issue. It can be bipartisan, and it should be bipartisan. And I really like this Trillion Trees idea because trees act like the lungs, for the earth. They capture CO2 and they turn it into oxygen. So it's something that we can't do a trillion trees in the US alone, but with us, along with working with other countries through incentives with businesses, through incentives maybe through federal aid to other countries, tax credits for people who plant trees, we can get to that trillion tree mark by, I think they're looking at 2050. That's something that I'm definitely on board with, because you have certain countries that are now look at in South America, they're going after the trees in the Amazon. We don't want to keep, in addition to us planting trees, we got to stop them from cutting them down. So that's something we also have to focus on on the federal level. But there are tons and tons of different programs, incentivizing people for developing cleaner ways to produce energy. There is a congressman I was talking to last week was saying that they're developing. There's a project that's being developed by the federal government that can suck carbon out of the air. It's amazing what technology can do. I've seen it in Albany through local bills that have been going through there, but now I'm going to see it and support them on the federal level.
Thank you, Assemblyman. My name is Harrison Bench, and I'm the Deputy Director of Students for Climate Action. You just touched upon renewable energy, and so the next question we have for you is dealing with offshore wind energy, because New York has ambitious goals to power 6 million homes with 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind power by the year 2035, but we need action on the federal level as well. The Federal Bureau of Land Management was supposed to come out in 2019 with a map of new offshore wind area in the United States, but that map has still not been released. So as a congressional representative, what would you do to help advance offshore wind projects?
Well, yeah, I know Governor Cuomo in New York does have a very ambitious goal. There's a project off the coast of Montauk, I believe right now, which would power 900,000 homes, or on the South Fork, or on the eastern end of Long Island. It's a great project. I think it's 35 miles off of Montauk. It wouldn't really affect anybody. I think even the commercial fishermen are on board with it, which is a big industry out there. On the federal level, we do need them to move a little quicker on these projects that have local support. There is also, I know Congressman King, Congressman Swazi, and I even think Congressman Zeldin all supported. There was a offshore wind tax credit. It's something that, again, bipartisan. Congressman King, Congressman Swazi, Republican, Democrat, that had bipartisan support that allowed these wind farms to go forward. A lot of these technologies, you need that extra incentive. You need that extra tax credit. It's not it might not cost us a full dollar helping this business to do it, but they're willing to do it if it only costs them 65 cents. We can offer them a 35% tax credit, then it makes sense to them. So any way we can get businesses, individuals to do the project on their own, incentivize them to do it on their own with some sort of a tax credit, I definitely would be supportive of that. And that's pretty much what the federal government can do.
Well, speaking of which, there is a solar investment tax credit, or ITC, that has been out there and has been helping to make the solar industry booming in the United States. Since the tax credit was established in 2006, there's been a 10,000% increase in solar industry in the United States, in creating tens of thousands of jobs and investing billions of dollars in the solar industry in the United States. We know, despite this success, that the solar ITC is at risk of being expiring in 2021. Would you support extension of that program or continuation of that tax credit? And what else would you do to help support the solar industry here in Long Island and in the United States writ large?
Well, I absolutely support the solar industry. It's actually a pretty big industry in the district. There are quite a few businesses that produce solar panels. They develop them. So you're right. They have created jobs. They've created jobs right here on Long Island. I would also, on a personal level, I know quite a few people around here that use that tax credit when things were going well for them. They said, we have some extra cash. There's this tax credit. Let's install solar. And it worked. Everybody put it in. They were happy. They got their tax credit back. They were now producing clean energy with solar. And then a good friend of mine and his wife they did it last year. They were both laid off during COVID. And so, both of them, husband and wife, they say, all right, how are we going to make our bills? I got to pay my mortgage. we got to buy food. We have to pay gas. You know what they didn't have to worry about? Electric. Because when they had the money, they were smart. They reinvested in their home. They got their solar panels up, and now when they were hurting, when they needed help,
they didn't have to worry about how they were going to pay their electric bill because the solar panels are doing that for them. So not just on an economic level from the jobs that they've created, the solar panel, the tax credit has created in my district, but what it's done for people that I know, I have actual stories of how it's benefited people. So I would 100% support the extension of the tax credit. Also, just again, supporting innovation, whatever we can do for businesses. I sat on the energy committee in Albany, and one time we went and visited a solar farm in Rensselaer County. And they were showing us in this solar farm that they have these new solar panels that they were developing that can still collect 80% or 70 or 80% of capacity on a rainy day. It was amazing what they could do. There's no sun out, but they're still collecting solar energy. So it's some sort of, not just for the tax credit for putting on solar panels, but also supporting businesses through some sort of program, maybe investment or tax credits for them to develop these new energies, because technology is going to keep getting better every day, as I saw, and it'll just keep getting better. So any way we can support that will also be great.
New York has one of the most aggressive plans in the nation when it comes to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. But in order to meet those standards on a national level, those reductions on a national level, we need strong federal leadership. The expansion of offshore drilling in the Arctic, the expansion of hydrofracking, and reversing regulations on coal and the coal industry is moving our country in the wrong direction. So I want to ask, how will you fight back against fossil fuels and those industries that are emitting a lot of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases?
Well, I mean, I know there was a plan, there was talk about having offshore drilling off of the coast of Long Island at one point, or certain areas on the East Coast, and I've already come out against that. I don't even think there's an existence of oil, but we don't need it. We don't want it, so I wouldn't support it. And one thing about coal, which was interesting, I was actually doing a little research. I didn't realize, but the use of coal is actually dropping over the last 15 years in the U.S. So coal-produced power is, I think, cut in almost half from what it was in 2015. And you've seen the growth of solar. You've seen the growth of what else? Gas, which is, gas is a fossil fuel, but it also produces CO2 emissions at half of what carbon and what coal and oil do. So, you're not going to you can't produce all our energy on renewables alone. Having gas, natural gas is better than working with coal and oil. So having more projects that do that, that's better. If we can get rid of the old coal power, if we can get rid of the old gasoline power plants and come up with new natural gas power plants, that will help. It's still a fossil fuel, but it will cut down on carbon emissions. But like we just talked about, the offshore tax credit for wind farms, the solar production tax credit, continuing those tax credits, incentivizing people to invest in renewable energies is the main way. As the federal government, we can pass those tax credits. We can make sure they're there, so people say, you know what, I have the choice between natural gas or I have the choice between solar. I'm going to go with solar because I have that tax credit. You know what? Tugging on my heartstring a little. If I can do something better for the environment at the same cost, I'm going to do it. So we can do that on the federal level. So pushing to keep those tax credits, pushing to keep the innovation so the technology can get better. So the technology gets cheaper. That's also something we can focus on. And again, that on the federal level, you can do it on a much bigger level than you can in New York State.
Thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, one of the biggest challenges that we're going to be facing here on Long Island with climate change is risk of drought and saltwater intrusion into our drinking water supply. Clean drinking water in particular, is a huge public health concern and something that we are facing now, not just from saltwater intrusion, also from groundwater contamination, replacing lead pipes, dealing with sort of the contamination of our past. As a member of Congress, what would you do to help ensure that there is clean drinking water supply available here in Long Island, and how would we help remedy the contamination of the past?
Well, as a member of the State Assembly, I've actually voted for several bills that banned certain products that were contaminating the aquifer. I mean, it was I remember Adrian Esposito was up there last year, and there was a big bill. I can't remember the name of what it was, but it was something she had been fighting for a long time, and we finally passed it last year. And I was happy to support that legislation. But moving to Congress, you're 100% right. There is a drinking water problem on Long Island. The aquifer is being contaminated, not just from man-made contaminants, but also nitrogen. There was a report last year that Suffolk's aquifer was having huge levels of nitrogen, was contaminating the drinking water. This is coming from mostly, the report said, cesspools, old septic systems. Most of Suffolk County and the areas of Nassau County, Suffolk County, most of Suffolk County is not sewered. And the areas of Suffolk County and Nassau County that are sewered have old sewage treatment plants. So, and there hasn't been an infrastructure bill out of Washington in decades. We need Washington to pass a full infrastructure bill, not just roads, not just bridges, not just energy infrastructure, but specifically also dealing with clean water infrastructure and sewer infrastructure. Because until we can stop, get the homes that are connected to all the old septic systems, the old cesspools, get them connected to sewer systems, so that nitrogen isn't going into the aquifer, it's not going out into the Great South Bay. Until we get the money from the federal government, the state's not going to do it. The state has said, Governor Cuomo has said he's come out with a sewer plan, more money for clean water, but it works so much better. And as we've seen in the past, the states, the counties, the towns, they'll do these projects when they have matching federal dollars. They'll say, well, if I'm going to get $3 from the federal government for every $1 I spend, you know what? Now it makes sense. It's not just for the environment. Also, we get these, we get the sewage treatment plants, we get the sewers working. It's also going to be good for the economy. It's one of the few things that environmentalists and businesses can agree on. You know, sewers are good for Long Island. They're good for the environment.
We have a few more minutes if you'd like to say anything else to your future potential constituents.
Well, as I said in the beginning, I grew up on Long Island. I'm third generation here. Grew up 5 minutes, not even from the Great South Bay. You know, being a pro-environment is not a Republican or Democratic issue. It's you know, as a Long Island Republican, I don't think you can have a Long Island Republican that's not pro-environment. It should be a bipartisan issue, being pro-environment. And I've done a very good job in Albany of supporting bills that I've thought have helped the environment on Long Island. I'm going to continue to do that when I get to Washington, D.C. as the next congressman. Congressman King was very good, had a very good voting record for the environment. I plan on working with Congressman Swazi and Congressman Zeldin to continue the good work that they've done for the environment on Long Island. And you know, it's not a Republican Democrat issue. I have a good voting record in the past, and I'll continue to have one in the future.
Okay, so there you have it. 4 candidates running for Congress talking about climate change. Sadly, it might be the only time that they got 15 minutes to talk about climate change. We're going to take just a couple of questions here. There are 35 questions listed. There's another 30 on Facebook because we have another 200 people watching via the Facebook streaming. So we're just going to take a couple of questions. Gordy, and I'm going to give you the first question. The first one is about electric vehicles. So, sorry, the viewer is asking, what about charging stations for EVs? And what do you think about grants to schools, libraries, and businesses for installing EV charging stations to encourage people to buy them?
Yeah, well, we got to build infrastructure to support electric vehicles on Long Island, all over the state, all over the country. That's happening as we speak. Now, as Julie said, of course, many people will be able to charge their electric vehicles at home, but we do need to incentivize, and I think to some degree, potentially mandate that employers install electric vehicle chargers so you can charge up your car while you're at work. NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, is rolling out a major infrastructure deployment program on this, so there's more to come. And you know, we need to essentially electrify the transportation sector, the heating sector, and of course the electric sector also needs to be powered entirely with renewable in order to meet our climate goals.
And Melissa, I think this next question is a good one for you. Someone's asking, how can preserving natural spaces and coastal lands on Long Island help build resiliency to sea level rise and storm surges?
You know, it's about resiliency, and there's a lot of ways, and I wish Allison Branco was here to talk more about this, but ways to protect our shorelines from climate change and sea level rise. And it's not necessarily bulkheads, right? It's not the artificial. There's ways that you can do natural planting. There's ways to promote a way to encourage absorption. So when that sea level or a storm surge hits, that your property or public lands are more vulnerable to, or less vulnerable to climate change. So it's, you know, natural ways are better than non-natural ways. And there's a lot of ways that you can pursue that.
Okay, this next one is for anybody who wants it. Would it be possible to reach climate change goals without offshore wind farms and just use solar and land-based wind turbines?
I don't think we're expecting to be able to do that. I think the state of New York is expecting that, you know, right now we're calling for 9,000 megawatts of power from offshore wind. We've only had approval of about 1,700 megawatts of offshore wind, which is going to be enough to power about 1.5 or 6 million homes. So we have a lot more clean energy to go, and it just doesn't seem like it's viable without having offshore wind because of the amount of energy that we need to replace fossil fuels.
And
I agree.
And I just want to add, you know, to achieve the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, we need offshore wind and we need solar. And that's is going to get us to the goal of that renewable energy directive that we need to combat CO2.
100%. Maybe the next one we can have either Harrison or Christine. It says, it's an interesting question. Given that renewable energy technologies are still evolving and the prices will likely come down, shouldn't we wait to use them until they're fully mature?
I would say that there should be no wait when it comes to using the renewable energy sources that are currently available and accessible to us. It's, you know, it is true that, you know, as research, development, and investment into renewable energy sources continues, the prices will come down for the consumer. And, you know, if you're not in the financial situation right now where you're able to afford something such as an electric vehicle or solar panels on your home, I mean, you should definitely wait until you do have that financial stability. But, you know, the solutions, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the solutions for solving climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions are here. They are available. They will, you know, the prices will continue to drop, but they are available to use right now. And there's so many consumers, homeowners, businesses, and even governments around the country and around the world that are already, you know, financing renewable energy projects. One big initiative of ours with Students for Climate Action is trying to give school districts more leeway when it comes to paying off debt incurred by renewable energy projects. But as prices for renewable energy do continue to come down, hopefully for the consumer, for the business person, for the school, for the, you know, district, for the government, renewable energy will become more of a possibility.
Yeah, I just want to chime in on this one. You know, it's funny because Gordian and I worked 18 years ago on the first offshore wind farm proposed for Long Island. That was one of the arguments. Oh, you should wait. You know, the technology will advance and the price will come down. And that's true for anything, though. Are we all going to wait to get a cell phone? Are we going to wait to get a computer? Are we going to wait to get the more modern technology? We'll wait another 10 years. And the answer is always no, because we have to live with today's tools and with today's technology. And when we start to fight climate change today, that's how we're going to win. We don't win by postponing it till tomorrow. So, okay, 8:31. We're going to squeeze in one more question here. Do we really need offshore wind farm? Will it impact marine life? We can hold that one. How about we do a combo question? Will offshore wind farm impact marine life? And also, how does climate change impact our oceans? Is actually a question that was asked numerous times from people, and impact on fish. So you wanna, why don't you start us off, Gordian?
Well, yeah, climate change certainly impacts our oceans, impacts everything. And the fishing, the commercial fishing industry, the recreational fishing industries will, of course, be very much impacted. Offshore wind turbines and wind farms, just like any other infrastructure we built, any other technologies, also have impacts, environmental impacts. And we got to make sure that these things are sited and operated in a way that minimize those impacts. So on balance, we've got to look as to what the impact of fossil fuel in the status quo was versus the impact of going to renewable energy technologies. And typically, the renewable energy technology comes out way ahead in terms of environmental impacts compared to fossil fuels.
And I want to just chime in about the fish and commercial fishing and recreational fishing. First off, the biggest threat to our fishing industry is climate change. Our oceans are acidifying, which means that the acidity level is increasing. That makes it very difficult for a shellfish and finfish larval to develop and to flourish. The patterns of tides and currents is changing. And also that means that there's a lot of turmoil with fish being able to survive in places where they used to. We have a lobster injury in Long Island Sound that is 90% of what it was 20 years ago. And we can go on and on with those examples. So climate change as a threat to our oceans is a threat to our finfish industry and our commercial fishing industry. So in order to keep that industry sustainable and able to survive and flourish, we need to fight climate change. And, you know, we like to say at CC, if you can, when you change the way we produce energy, we'll change the world and we'll change it for the better. And that's what this fight for climate change is all about, I think, for all of us. I'm going to get Julie let the last word real quick, but before I do, I want to make another housekeeping announcement. We got a late notice that there is a third candidate running on the Green Party line in the 2nd Congressional District. His name is Harold Berger. Harold submitted his own video of 8 minutes, which we're going to be posting on Facebook if anybody would like to see it. And Julie, you want to talk about voting?
I do.
I knew
it. Here in New York, we have something new, right? Everybody knows you can vote on November 3rd. That's Election Day. They've certainly made it a lot easier, in particular this year because of COVID, for people to use absentee ballots. But something that started last year and is available this year again is early voting. And early voting works the same way as when you vote on Election Day. You go into a polling location, you fill out your ballot, you put it into the machine, it gets scanned, and it's counted just the way it would if you voted on November 3rd. So we are encouraging everyone to take a pledge to vote early this year. It starts on October 24th. It runs through November 1st. It very often is not in your same polling location, but it makes sure that you don't have to wait on lines. You're not bound by the November 3rd date. You have 10 days in which you can vote early. For whichever candidates you want. We would certainly encourage you to vote for candidates who are going to support climate change and the fight against climate change. So we would ask you to all consider taking our pledge to vote early, and we encourage you to get out there and vote.
So I want to thank everyone for joining. We had over 200 people join us on this particular site. We had another over 200 join on the Facebook streaming. And frankly, getting 400 people to join on the same event on one night is terrific. I mean, it's great for the candidates to know that because they know you care about climate change. It's great, frankly, for us to know that because you help fuel our fire to continue this battle with all of you and to raise your voices. So thank you so much for participating. Thank you to the panelists and to all of the supporting organizations. We had 20 other supporting organizations where Harrison's supposed to flash them on the screen right now so you can see who they are. Okay. Well, anyway, thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate it. And up there they all are. Thank you again and have a great night. Bye.